Have you ever been told to be happy? Not asked, not invited, told, in the specific, confident, slightly aggressive way that the contemporary culture delivers the instruction through every available channel simultaneously, through the motivational content that populates every social media feed, through the productivity frameworks that promise to optimize your emotional states along with your morning routine, through the wellness industry that has built a market worth hundreds of billions of dollars around the premise that happiness is a skill that can be learned, a habit that can be installed, a destination that can be reached through the right combination of gratitude journaling and cold exposure and breathwork and the correct configuration of one's relationship with discomfort, through the specific, relentless, quietly tyrannical cultural pressure of a civilization that has decided somewhere in the last several decades that the appropriate default emotional state for a human being who is not in the middle of an obvious crisis is happiness, and that the failure to achieve and maintain this default state is not a natural response to the genuine difficulty of the genuine conditions of a genuine human life. It is a personal failing, a management problem, a deficiency of the correct practices or the correct mindset or the correct relationship with the contents of one's own consciousness that the correct intervention will correct. If you have felt the specific quality of pressure that this instruction generates, not the pressure of a genuine aspiration toward genuine well-being, but the pressure of a mandate to perform an emotional state regardless of whether the actual conditions of the actual life you are living are ones that the emotional state genuinely reflects, you have encountered something that Yuval Noah Harari regards as one of the most philosophically confused and practically counterproductive features of the contemporary culture's relationship with human experience. Not the desire for happiness, which is genuine and understandable and in many of its forms genuinely worth pursuing. The specific instruction to push yourself to be happy every day. The instruction that treats happiness as an obligation, as a product to be manufactured through the correct application of effort and technique, as a state that can and should be maintained through sheer commitment to its maintenance, regardless of what the actual interior of the actual consciousness has to say about whether the maintenance corresponds to anything genuine. Harari's response to this instruction is not the response of someone who thinks happiness is unimportant or that the pursuit of human well-being is misguided. It is the response of someone who thinks the instruction is wrong about what happiness is, wrong about how it is produced, wrong about the relationship between effort and genuine positive experience, and wrong in ways that are consequentially harmful to the specific people who follow it most earnestly, who are, paradoxically, the people whose genuine commitment to the mandate to be happy produces, through the specific mechanisms of the psychology of forced positivity, and the neuroscience of emotional suppression, outcomes that are systematically less happy than the outcomes that would be produced by a more honest and more informed relationship with the actual character of the actual emotional life they are attempting to manage. To understand what is wrong with the instruction and what the genuinely adequate alternative to it looks like requires understanding something about the nature of happiness itself that the contemporary culture's treatment of it consistently obscures. The obscuring is not deliberate. It is the product of the specific commercial and cultural incentives that organize the happiness industry around the version of happiness that is most compatible with the commercial objectives of the systems that have built their business models around it, around the version of happiness that can be sold, that can be produced through purchasable products and learnable techniques and marketable frameworks, that can be pursued as a continuous project that requires continuous investment of the specific kinds that the happiness industry is positioned to provide. The version of happiness that cannot be sold, that does not require any product or technique or framework for its production, that emerges not from the correct application of effort toward its achievement, but from the specific quality of honest engagement with actual experience that is its only genuine source, is precisely the version that the happiness industry is not organized to promote. Not because the industry is cynically suppressing the truth about happiness, but because the truth about happiness is incompatible with the premise that happiness is a product. And the premise that happiness is a product is the premise on which the industry's entire existence depends. Harari's analysis of what happiness actually is begins, as his analysis always begins, with the evolutionary framework that provides the most honest available account of what the emotional architecture of the human being was actually built to produce. And the evolutionary account of happiness is not the account that the happiness industry prefers to promote. The evolutionary account is that happiness, in the sense of the pleasant emotional states that human beings experience as genuinely positive, was not the evolutionary process's objective. The evolutionary process had no objectives. It was a blind, amoral mechanism that produced whatever worked. And what worked in the specific conditions of the ancestral environment was the specific emotional architecture that motivated the specific behaviors that increased reproductive success. The pleasant emotional states, the states that human beings have always experienced as happiness in some form, were produced by this architecture as motivational signals rather than as rewards. The pleasure of eating was not the evolutionary process's gift to the organisms that ate. It was the signal that activated the motivation to eat, which kept the organisms alive, which enabled reproduction. The pleasure of sexual activity was not the evolutionary process's gift to the organisms that experienced it. It was the signal that activated the motivation for the behavior that produced reproduction. The pleasure of social connection was not the evolutionary process's gift to the organisms that connected. It was the signal that activated the motivation for the social behavior that produced the group coherence that enabled the collective survival on which individual survival depended. In each case, the pleasant emotional state was not the destination. It was the fuel, the motivational signal that kept the organism moving toward the behaviors that served the evolutionary objective of reproductive success. And as a fuel rather than a destination, the pleasant emotional state was specifically designed to be temporary, to motivate behavior by its presence and then to withdraw, creating the specific deficit of its absence that motivated the next behavior. The animal that felt permanently satisfied with the food it had just eaten would not seek more food. The permanently satisfied animal is an animal that starves when the current supply runs out. The animal that felt the pleasure of eating and then had that pleasure withdraw, leaving the deficit of hunger that motivated the seeking of more food, was the animal that maintained the behavioral patterns that kept it alive. This is the evolutionary design of happiness. Not permanent, not achievable through the correct configuration of one's circumstances and one's emotional management. Temporary by design. Motivational by design. A signal that rises in response to specific triggers and then withdraws, leaving the specific deficit that motivates the next reaching toward the next trigger. The hedonic treadmill is not a malfunction of the emotional system. It is the emotional system's most fundamental design feature. The instruction to push yourself to be happy every day is therefore, in the most literal biological sense, an instruction to fight the design. To maintain, through effort and technique and sheer commitment to the mandate, the specific emotional state that the design of the emotional system was specifically constructed to prevent from being permanent. To override the withdrawal mechanism that the evolutionary process installed precisely because the permanent presence of the pleasant state would have been fatal to the organisms that experienced it. To achieve, through the force of will and the correct application of technique, what the entire history of the evolutionary process was organized to prevent. This is why the instruction fails. Not because the people who follow it are insufficient in their commitment or inadequate in their technique, but because the instruction is asking for something that the design of the system it is attempting to operate makes structurally unavailable. The pleasant emotional state will withdraw. This is not a problem to be solved. It is a feature of the system. And the attempt to prevent the withdrawal by pushing harder toward the state that is withdrawing does not address the withdrawal. It addresses the symptom while ignoring the mechanism. And the mechanism, unaddressed, continues to operate exactly as it was designed to operate, withdrawing the pleasant state, creating the deficit, motivating the next reaching, and ensuring, through the relentless efficiency of its design, that the destination of permanent happiness remains permanently just ahead of wherever the reaching has arrived. But Harari's critique of the instruction to push yourself to be happy goes deeper than the evolutionary argument about the impossibility of permanent pleasant emotional states. It goes to something more specific and more practically consequential for the people who are currently following the instruction. It goes to what the pushing itself does to the experience of the person doing it. The psychology of emotional suppression and forced positivity has been studied with considerable care across the last several decades of psychological research. And the findings are consistent in a direction that the happiness industry has every incentive to not prominently feature in its marketing materials. The deliberate suppression of negative emotional states, the sustained effort to maintain positive emotional states regardless of the actual character of the actual experience that is generating the emotional response, does not produce the stable, positive emotional condition that the effort is aimed at. It produces, through several specific and well-documented mechanisms, outcomes that are systematically worse than what would have been produced by the honest acknowledgement and the genuine processing of the emotional responses that the suppression is suppressing. The first mechanism is the rebound effect. The deliberate suppression of a thought or an emotional state requires the continuous expenditure of cognitive resources on the monitoring and the management of the suppressed content. Resources that are not available for other cognitive activities while they are being devoted to the suppression. And when the suppression is relaxed, when the cognitive resources required for its maintenance are needed elsewhere, the suppressed content returns with an intensity that is characteristically greater than it would have had if the suppression had not been applied. The thought or the emotional state that is being suppressed is not being processed. It is being held in place. And holding it in place requires energy. And when the energy is released, the content is released with it, often more forcefully than it would have appeared if it had been allowed to be processed genuinely in the first instance. The person who pushes themselves to be happy in the face of genuine difficulty is a person who is devoting significant cognitive and emotional resources to the suppression of the genuine response to the genuine difficulty. Resources that are not available for the genuine processing of the genuine difficulty. For the understanding of what the difficulty is, what it requires, what the honest and adequate response to it would be. The genuine processing, prevented by the pushing toward happiness, is deferred. The difficulty, unprocessed, continues to generate the emotional response that the pushing is attempting to suppress. The pushing generates the suppression. The suppression generates the resource expenditure. The resource expenditure reduces the capacity for the genuine processing that would actually address the difficulty. And the difficulty, unaddressed, continues. The second mechanism is the authenticity deficit. The sustained effort to experience and express positive emotional states that do not correspond to the actual character of the actual experience creates a specific and well-documented gap between the presented emotional state and the genuine emotional state. A gap that the person maintaining it experiences as a specific quality of inauthenticity, of performing a version of themselves that does not correspond to the actual content of their actual experience. This inauthenticity is not merely philosophically uncomfortable. It has specific practical consequences for the quality of the person's relationships, their decision-making, and their capacity for genuine engagement with the actual requirements of their actual situation. The relationships of the person who is performing positive emotional states that do not correspond to their genuine emotional states are relationships in which the other people in the relationship are engaging not with the actual person, but with the performed version of the person. The performed version is less real, less complex, less genuinely present to the actual difficulties and the actual needs and the actual character of the person who is performing it than the genuine version would be. And the other people in the relationship who are engaging with the performed version rather than the genuine one are in a relationship that is systematically less nourishing, less genuinely connected, and less capable of providing the specific quality of genuine mutual knowing that genuine relationship requires than a relationship with the genuine version would be. The third mechanism is the specifically corrosive effect on the capacity for genuine positive experience that the sustained effort to manufacture positive emotional states through willful pushing produces over time. The capacity for genuine positive experience, the capacity to experience genuine pleasure and genuine joy, and genuine contentment in the specific moments and the specific encounters and the specific experiences that these responses are the natural, spontaneous, unforced responses to, is not enhanced by the sustained practice of manufacturing their simulacra. It is diminished by it. Because the sustained practice of manufacturing the positive emotional state, in the absence of the genuine conditions that would produce it spontaneously, develops in the person doing the manufacturing a specific relationship with positive emotional states that is organized around the effort of their production rather than the receptivity to their genuine occurrence. The person who has been pushing themselves to be happy has been cultivating the habit of relating to positive emotional states as products of effort rather than as spontaneous responses to genuine experience. And this habit, developed through the sustained practice of pushing toward happiness, gradually undermines the specific quality of receptivity, of genuine openness to the genuine positive experience that the genuine moment of genuine positive experience requires. That is the actual capacity the genuine positive experience depends on. The pusher, paradoxically, becomes progressively less capable of the genuine happiness they are pushing toward, because the pushing itself is developing the specific relationship with positive emotional states that prevents genuine positive experience from being genuinely experienced rather than performed. What does Harari suggest instead? Not the instruction to stop caring about happiness, which would be its own form of confusion. Not the instruction to embrace suffering as the path to enlightenment, which would be a different and equally confused form of the same error. Something more specific, more nuanced, and more deeply grounded in an honest understanding of what the genuine positive experience of human life actually requires. The alternative begins with a distinction that the happiness industry consistently collapses. The distinction between the pleasant feeling that is the direct object of most contemporary happiness seeking, the specific quality of positive hedonic tone that the industry's products and practices are organized to produce, and the deeper quality of genuine engagement with genuine experience that produces, as a byproduct rather than as a directly targeted outcome, the kind of positive inner life that actually sustains human flourishing across the timescale of a genuinely lived human life. These are not the same thing. The pleasant feeling is an object that can be directly targeted through the specific activation of the brain's reward systems by the specific triggers that those systems respond to. It can be produced through the consumption of pleasurable substances and pleasurable experiences, through the activation of the social reward system by the delivery of social recognition, through the activation of the achievement reward system by the completion of specific tasks and the achievement of specific goals, through the activation of the novelty-seeking system by the delivery of novel stimuli. The happiness industry is organized in its entirety around the production of pleasant feelings through these mechanisms. The deeper quality of genuine engagement with genuine experience is not an object that can be directly targeted in this way. It is not produced by any specific trigger or any specific practice aimed at its direct production. It is produced, rather, as the natural and unforced quality of the experience of a consciousness that is genuinely present to its own actual experience. That is actually attending to what is actually happening in the interior of its own life, rather than managing what is happening toward the production of the targeted outcome. That is allowing the actual quality of the actual moment of the actual experience to be what it is, rather than continuously adjusting its relationship with the moment toward the production of the emotional state that the mandate to be happy requires. This is what Harari means when he points toward the contemplative framework's understanding of the relationship between happiness and presence, not the mindfulness app's version of presence, which is typically organized around the production of a specific quality of calm, pleasant feeling through the practice of attention to the present moment. The more fundamental and more demanding understanding of presence as the genuine, unmanaged, unforced, honest engagement with whatever is actually occurring in the actual present moment of the actual experience, including the difficult moments, including the painful moments, including the boring moments and the uncertain moments and the genuinely unresolved moments that constitute the actual texture of any genuine human life honestly lived. The genuine engagement with these moments, without the continuous effort to adjust their emotional quality toward the positive that the instruction to push yourself to be happy requires, does not produce more suffering. It produces less. Not because suffering is pleasant, Because the genuine engagement with suffering, the honest, unresisted, genuinely present encounter with the actual quality of the actual difficult experience, processes it in a way that the resistance to it, the pushing away of it toward the happiness that the mandate requires, consistently prevents. The difficult experience that is genuinely encountered, genuinely felt, genuinely allowed to be what it is rather than being managed toward what the mandate requires, moves through the consciousness in the way that genuine experience moves through a genuinely present consciousness. It arrives, it is experienced, it transforms, and it passes. The difficult experience that is resisted, pushed against, suppressed in the service of the mandate to be happy does not move through. It stays, held in place by the resistance, consuming the resources required for its suppression, prevented from the natural processing that genuine encounter would enable. Harari's personal account of how the sustained practice of meditation has changed his relationship with his own experience illuminates this principle with unusual clarity, not through the production of more frequent pleasant feelings, through the development of a different relationship with all feelings, pleasant and unpleasant alike. A relationship in which feelings are genuinely encountered rather than managed, genuinely noticed rather than acted upon, genuinely experienced rather than performed, and in which the genuine encounter, the honest, unresisted, genuinely present engagement with the actual quality of the actual emotional experience, regardless of its hedonic character, produces, over time and through the specific mechanism of genuine processing rather than managed suppression, a quality of inner life that is more genuinely stable, more genuinely satisfying, and more genuinely adequate to the actual requirements of the actual situation than anything the sustained pushing toward the positive emotional state has ever produced. The second element of Harari's alternative to the instruction to push yourself to be happy is the understanding that the most consistently genuine positive inner life is produced not by the direct pursuit of happiness but by the indirect cultivation of meaning. And that the cultivation of meaning is not the same as the cultivation of pleasant feeling, does not consistently produce pleasant feeling as its immediate output, and is in fact frequently characterized by the specific quality of genuine engagement with genuine difficulty that the instruction to push yourself to be happy is specifically organized to prevent. The distinction between happiness as pleasant feeling and meaning as genuine engagement with something that genuinely matters is one of the most important and most consistently neglected distinctions in the contemporary culture's treatment of human well-being. The culture consistently treats them as if they were two different ways of describing the same objective. As if the genuinely meaningful life were simply the genuinely happy life described in more elevated language. As if the cultivation of meaning were simply a more sophisticated path to the same destination that the direct pursuit of pleasant feeling is aimed at. They are not the same objective. The genuinely meaningful activity is frequently not pleasant. The care of a dying parent is meaningful and frequently not pleasant. The sustained engagement with a genuinely difficult intellectual problem is meaningful and frequently not pleasant. The maintenance of a genuinely honest relationship through the specific quality of genuine communication that honesty requires is meaningful and frequently not pleasant. The genuine commitment to a set of values in conditions that make living by those values costly is meaningful and frequently not pleasant. The meaningful life is not the life of maximum pleasant feeling. It is the life of maximum genuine engagement with the things that genuinely matter. And the things that genuinely matter are not the things that produce the most pleasant feeling. They are the things that produce the specific quality of genuine connection between the individual life and something larger than the individual life that meaning, in its most honest definition, consists of. The person who pushes themselves to be happy every day is a person who is organized, at the most fundamental level, around the management of their own hedonic state, around the continuous adjustment of the quality of their own felt experience toward the target that the mandate has set. This organization is not compatible with the genuine engagement with something larger than the management of one's own hedonic state that genuine meaning requires. Because genuine meaning requires, by definition, The willingness to allow the quality of one's own felt experience to be determined by the genuine requirements of the genuinely meaningful engagement, rather than by the mandate to maintain a specific hedonic target. The willingness to feel the difficulty that genuine difficulty produces, to feel the pain that genuine loss produces, to feel the specific quality of unsatisfied striving that genuine commitment to something genuinely important and genuinely difficult produces, to allow the actual quality of the actual experience to be what the actual experience genuinely is, rather than what the mandate to be happy requires it to appear to be. This willingness is not masochism. It is not the celebration of suffering as intrinsically valuable or the romantic glorification of difficulty as the necessary condition of the good life. It is the specific, accurate recognition that the life organized around the mandate to maintain a positive hedonic state is a life that has made the management of its own emotional condition the primary project of its existence, and that this primary project is specifically incompatible with the genuine engagement with something larger than the management of one's own emotional condition that the most genuinely positive inner life is actually produced by. The research on the relationship between happiness and meaning confirms this. Studies that examine the relationship between the subjective experience of happiness and the subjective experience of meaning across large populations and across extended timescales consistently find that the two variables are not the same variable.